The Wagon Train's Little Ghost, presented by Absolutely Haunted. When my family and I settled into a quiet farm, we were unaware that the ghostly echoes of the Oregon Trail still lingered on the land. Our peaceful life unraveled when a spectral wagon train rumbled through the night, leaving behind a little girl who desperately wanted to become part of our family. But as her presence grew more chilling, one question started to haunt us. Was she the spirit of a lost child, or something far more ancient and sinister? My husband worked long hours, and on the night our paranormal trouble started, he had called to say the road crew was facing a deadline, and the company had brought in lights so they could continue working, so not to wait up for him. I picked up the house a little, and around 10:30 I headed to bed. I was not lying there long when I realised the most delicious breeze was coming through my open window. I got excited when I realised I could smell the rain in the air. I love to go to sleep to thunderstorms. So many people are afraid of them, but I find them exciting. I rolled over onto my stomach and began to watch the lightning that preempted the rain. I was so completely at ease, lost in a peaceful daze, that at first my ears didn't fully register the sounds drifting through the air. I remember gazing out the window, utterly carefree, unaware that the paranormal world was about to turn my reality upside down. The first sound that broke through my tranquility was the distant clang of bells. It didn't startle me. I was in the countryside, surrounded by endless cow pastures. I had never noticed bells on the cows before, but perhaps I had simply overlooked them. Minutes passed, and the noise swelled, growing richer and more layered. It was no longer just the soft jingle of cowbells. Now I could hear the hum of voices, people chatting, calling out commands to their animals, the rhythmic pounding of horse hooves against the earth, a persistent raspy cough, small and childlike, the eerie groan of wagon wheels straining forward. The clatter of pots and pans shifted with the movement. The past was coming to life around me, or perhaps it had never left. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was hearing. The sounds hadn't faded. They persisted, growing richer and more immersive. I couldn't deny their presence, yet logic tried to ground me. Wagon train reenactments were common along this stretch of the Oregon Trail, their wooden wheels carving familiar paths through history. Perhaps this was just another group making their way through. But something didn't add up. Every reenactment I'd ever witnessed moved during the day, travelling under the safety of sunlight before setting up camp at night. I had never seen one journey after dark. A flicker of excitement stirred in me. A romanticised notion of witnessing history come to life beneath the night sky. I held my breath, anticipation tightening in my chest, as I waited for them to crest the hill and come into view. Any second now, I would see the wagons, the horses, the flickering lantern light cutting through the darkness. But as the moment stretched on, my excitement twisted into confusion. Nothing appeared. No shadowed figures, no rolling wagons, just the sounds. The rhythmic creak of wooden wheels, the murmur of voices, the steady clatter of hooves against the earth. The noises moved as if an entire caravan were passing before me, yet the landscape remained empty. I kid you not. There was nothing there. A surge of panic and disbelief sent me darting from window to window, my heart pounding as I frantically searched the north pasture, the very place where the deep wagon ruts carved history into the earth. I was desperate to prove myself wrong, to catch even the faintest glimpse of what my ears insisted was there. But the land lay empty. Then, clear as day, a man's voice cut through the night. "Hold up the train!" The command rang out with authority, so close it felt like the speaker stood no more than 60 feet from my house. My breath caught in my throat. The sound had weight, presence, yet there was no one there. No figures, no wagons, no horses. Only the ghostly echoes of a journey long past. I think because the sounds were up in the completely visible pasture and not down here with me, I was not as scared as I would have been otherwise. Actually, what I really was at that moment was curious. I had returned to my room with the thought that this was something weird going on, but what? A time slip? Ghosts? There was Flintstone up there. Could that hold memories? I had read something like that once. I think it was called the stone tape theory, but I could not remember the details. A sudden mix of fear and fascination gripped me. as I heard the distinct sound of horses breaking away from the wagon train, their hooves moving steadily down the hill toward my house. My pulse quickened. If I couldn't see them, could they see me? I reminded myself that my house hadn't even existed when these wagon trains once passed through, but just in case, just on the off chance that whatever this was could somehow perceive me. I pressed myself flat against my bed, barely daring to breathe, and listened. The horses slowed, then stopped beneath the towering tree near my driveway, about 10 feet from my bedroom window, under the same tree we'd been told was over 1,000 years old. Then the voices came. They were low and somber. 3 men speaking in hushed tones. They were talking about a little girl. She was with them, and she was about to die from illness. One man's voice wavered, thick with grief, as he spoke. I told you yesterday we shouldn't have moved. She didn't have long." His words carried the weight of regret, of helplessness. His voice cracked as he continued. "If we had just waited, that poor child could have been laid to rest with her family. Not left out here. Not alone. Not forgotten." A second man sighed, his tone firm but weary. "I know how you feel about that, Gus. But you know we have to cross the pass before the snows come. We're already cutting it close." Silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken, until the voice of a third man added, "Look up yonder, near that stream. There's a pretty tree there. Let's wait it out and bury her in that spot." "A pretty spot?" Gus snapped, his voice sharp with pain. "You think that makes up for her being alone?" For a moment, no one answered. Then one of the horses turned, its rider guiding it back toward the distant wagon train. Gus would have us stop every time someone got sick. He just doesn't understand what's at stake. Then without another word, they too rode away. For over an hour, I listened to their far-off conversations and the child speaking gibberish while lost in a fever dream. My heart broke for her as she cried out for her mother. "Mummy, I am scared. Where are you, Mummy?" She screamed often. She had women, caregivers, talking to her, trying to soothe her, pretending to be her mother. I sent up more than one prayer for this baby and the kind souls who helped her in her last hours. It was heartbreaking. I realised I was hearing those around her speak in conversations that would not be able to be heard normally, not if it was actual people speaking at this distance. Suddenly, silence. And then the digging began. True enough, it was under the tree near the creek the man had chosen earlier. Soon after, the sound of the train pulled away and left this little girl in her lonely grave. It was over, whatever it was. I stayed awake for another hour as I was a little bit scared, but sometime after I fell asleep and did not wake again until 3 a.m, when my husband finally made it home. I walked up there the next morning. I don't know what I thought I would see after decades, but I went anyway. It was a peaceful and beautiful spot, but my heart hurt knowing she was alone in this spot, and had been for how long. My daughter, who was 5, had trailed me up the hill as was usual, and I took her over and showed her the old wagon ruts and explained where they had come from. We returned to the barnyard so she could pet the sheep, and we continued our day uneventful. We did not realise we had someone watching us, or that perhaps she missed her mummy too. Up until the night of the wagon train, we had lived in the house as renters for over a year and a half without experiencing anything unusual, nothing even remotely paranormal. But that night changed everything. The following evening was a Saturday, which meant my husband was home. We spent the night with the kids, enjoying a quiet, ordinary evening. By 10:30 p.m, we had tucked them into bed and settled in ourselves. Sleep came quickly, wrapping us in the comfort of routine. But the night was far from over. I woke suddenly at 3 a.m, an uneasy stillness pressing down on the house. Drowsy but aware, I slipped out of bed and made my way through the dining room, my bare feet barely making a sound on the floor. The house was silent. As I entered the kitchen, my eyes landed on something that had belonged to my great-grandmother. Her iron kitchen stool. An old, cumbersome thing with pull-out steps sat next to the cabinet near the fridge. That stool was impossibly heavy, nearly 40 pounds, so solid that even I struggled to move it. My children couldn't budge it at all, and when it was moved, the clatter of its metal steps unfolding on their hinges always filled the room with noise. I moved through the darkened rooms, avoiding the lights, the faint glow of the yard light outside more than enough to guide me. I reached the bathroom, the door creaking softly as I entered. Less than 3 minutes passed, but in that time, an overwhelming unease began to creep over me. When I went to open the door wouldn't budge. I pushed harder, but it refused to move, as though something was holding it shut. Inching my arm out, I managed to slip my hand through the narrow gap. My fingers brushed against something solid and cold. To my horror, I realised what it was. The metal step stool, that very same 40-pound stool that always made a racket when it was moved, was now wedged tightly against the door, pinning me in the tiny bathroom, blocking my one escape. How had it gotten there? I hadn't heard a sound. I could feel my breath quicken, my heart pounding against my ribcage. The stool hadn't just moved. It had been placed there deliberately, trapping me. Somehow the stool had made its way all the way across the kitchen on its own. I had heard nothing. No footsteps. No creaking of the stool being moved. It was as if it had simply appeared there, wedged tightly against the door. Terrified, I screamed for my husband. The second the door was freed, I bolted out of the bathroom, my legs shaking beneath me. Something about this felt like a warning, a silent threat, and I couldn't make sense of how or why it had happened. At first, I thought Brett might be playing some twisted prank, but the sleepiness in his eyes and the genuine worry on his face told me otherwise. He asked me, his voice full of confusion, "How did that happen?" His concern was genuine, and in that moment, I knew he wasn't the one behind it. I rushed to check on the kids. They were all asleep, breathing deeply, their eyelids flickering with REM sleep. Not a single one of them could have moved the stool. A few days later, my daughter fell ill and had curled up on the sofa, the cool breeze drifting through the two large open windows that overlooked the side yard. My mother and I were outside, picking vegetables from the garden, when we suddenly heard the frantic sound of the side door slamming open. I turned just in time to see my daughter barreling toward me, her small body shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. She threw herself into my arms. She was stuttering and speaking gibberish, and I could feel her trembling so violently I thought she might be having some sort of a seizure or something. I wrapped my arms around her, picking her up, speaking softly to her, trying to calm her, while my mother rubbed her back. Slowly, the shaking began to subside, and when my daughter was finally able to speak coherently, her voice was thick with terror. She told us she had been woken by a voice, someone calling her name. The voice was unfamiliar, strange and unsettling, and it came from somewhere above her, near the stairs. When she went to investigate, she looked up the stairs and saw something that stopped her heart. What looked like a little girl, sitting on the landing. Her skin was pale, deathly white, almost like wax. Her eyes were black, hollow, rimmed with dark circles that seemed to swallow the light around them. The girl's face was twisted into something grotesque, a sickly sneer planted upon her face as she beckoned. In a voice that dripped with sweetness, she asked, "Will you come up here and play with me?" My daughter said the facial expression and the voice were at odds, and she felt in every inch of her horrified body, whatever that was evil. My daughter screamed, her blood-curdling cry echoing through the house, and she ran, out the side door and straight into my arms. A few days passed uneventfully, until one evening my daughter and I were in the upstairs playroom. On a farm, there is always a shortage of playmates, and she and I were playing with her Barbie dolls. She had a huge collection. I had recently added a long-haired doll which she adored. It was her new favourite. Looking around, I did not see it, so I questioned her about its whereabouts. She too looked around and shrugged to indicate she did not see the doll either. I told her maybe it was downstairs, and we continued to play with the many she had in the playroom. We were sitting on the rug in the middle of the floor, and we were playing model, which meant we would dress the dolls in outfits and pretend to be making them walk the runway. We played like this for a few minutes, the room thick with the quiet buzz of our imagination. But then, the sound broke the calm. The closet door began to creak. Slowly, unnaturally. At first I thought it was just the old wood settling, but as the door inched open, I froze. My blood ran cold. To our horror, we watched as her beloved Barbie, the doll that had been missing, began to walk out of the closet by itself. The doll's tiny plastic feet moved deliberately, one step after another, crossing the floor toward us. It moved in the same way my daughter and I had been making the other dolls move like a person walking. But there was no one holding it. No strings. No hands guiding it. I could feel my breath catch in my throat, my heart pounding against my chest. My daughter's eyes widened in pure, unadulterated terror as she let out a shriek so loud it echoed through the room. Without thinking, I snatched my daughter up, clutching her to me as I ran past that doll, my legs moving faster than they ever had before. We bolted down the stairs. We were both crying and upset when we got to the bottom and slammed the stair door shut. I leaned against the door, as if I thought the doll was going to push the door open. Upstairs I heard the playroom door violently slam shut. My husband and I were both aware we needed to leave because whatever that was seemed to be zoning in on our children. My oldest son, who was 9, and my daughter 5, were both hearing another child call them from the stairs to the second floor. It was a female child's voice, and it would ask them to come upstairs and play, always using a coaxing voice. Both children would explain how the voice scared them. Both agreed they were scared of the little girl, and when they glimpsed her, she felt dangerous, and they would run away. My son was following me down the stairs one day, just chatting about something that he had seen. I turned to look at him, as I had reached the bottom of the stairs, and suddenly he pitched forward as if someone had shoved him. I saw the way his chest came forward like it does when someone shoves someone in the back. He fell forward onto his knees at an odd angle as he was coming down, and would have fell the last few steps to the bottom if I had not managed to catch him in my arms. His legs and knees were bruised pretty badly, and he was terrified and kept saying someone had pushed him in the back, but the touch felt like needles. I know no one was behind him, at least no one I could see. Needless to say, they moved into our room to sleep. It was a huge room, as most old houses have, and so we moved their beds into the corner on the other side of the space. Personally, I did not want them anywhere else as I felt I needed to protect them. One night after they had went to bed, I was lying there waiting on my husband to get home with just the television playing. Some movement above my son's bed caught my eye, and to my horror, I watched the shadow of what looked like a young girl pace back and forth on the wall above my son and daughter's twin beds for 2 hours. It was apparently not bothered by the fact I was watching it. That was it. We moved 65 miles away from that old farm. We were the last tenants it ever had. I was shocked when, out of curiosity, I drove past it and found the doors and windows had been removed, and the owner had penned cows up around the house, and they were freely walking in and out. The farmer we knew who rented the land said that the cow thing was done for a year, and then the owner had the place burnt down. He said the owner told him that the well ran dry, and that was why he had it burned. I would have thought they would have put in a new well, not burn the whole house his great-great-grandfather had built. That did not make much sense to me. I have to wonder, looking back, was there something there all the time? Was it child buried in the north pasture by the wagon train? Or was that even real? Could a spirit be able to make you think you're hearing things like that? Was it something darker? I guess we will never know.